President Trump in Phoenix clearly hinting he was going to pardon Sheriff Joe Arpaio. In fact, there's a line from The Godfather, "Today I settle all family business." And while the country was watching Hurricane Harvey Friday night, the president fired Sebastian Gorka, set out guidelines for banning transgenders in the military, and pardoned Sheriff Joe. Which means it's time now for our Sunday group. GOP strategist Karl Rove, columnist for The Hill, Juan Williams, Catherine Lucy, who covers the White House for the Associated Press, and Josh Holmes, Mitch McConnell's former chief of staff and a GOP strategist. Well, Josh, are we overanalyzing this?
Yeah, I don't think there's any grave threat to the democracy here. I mean, the presidential pardons are pretty clear. He's got really broad authority to do just about anything he wants, and this is an 85-year-old law enforcement officer who, may or may not get 6 months in prison as a result of a guilty verdict. In comparison to some of the pardons and clemency that we've seen over the last decade or 2 decades, it sort of pales in comparison. My guess is that your reaction to this is probably a direct attribution to how you feel about Joe Arpaio. And, he's not my cup of tea, but I think for a lot of Trump supporters, he's the face of law and order.
The president escalated his fight this week with members of Congress. It's become a pretty long roll call. Let's put it up on the screen. Mitch McConnell, Bob Corker, John McCain, Flake, Speaker Ryan. Josh, you have a dog in this fight as the former chief of staff to Mitch McConnell. Is this the president separating himself and picking fights with all these members, Republican leaders? Is that going to make it harder for him to pass and them to pass the agenda?
Yeah, no question. There's a great piece in the Washington Post by Paul Kane this weekend that explores the presidential triangulation, and it can be a very effective strategy at times. Where it's not an effective strategy is when your party runs Congress and you're before the midterms. Where it could lead is impeachment. And I think, look, it has one practical effect of attacking your own party. It drives down the overall approval of Congress, your leaders within, and the generic ballot, meaning Republicans versus Democrat. Played out to its logical extension, what it means is that Democrats have a heck of a lot better shot in the midterms than they probably would ordinarily and otherwise. And if Democrats take over the House, if this president believes the Democratic base is not going to force impeachment proceedings, he hasn't been paying attention to what's happening.
Well, let's talk about Josh, and I gently pointed this out to the Secretary of State when they were talking about restraint, and he and then he fires off 3 missiles. They look a little silly, don't they?
Well, a little bit. I mean, I think you get the impression by listening to the president and listening to the Secretary of State over the last week that they were proceeding as if they're dealing with a rational actor here. And I think anybody who has seen the way that the U.S. foreign policy has proceeded with North Korea over the last 2 decades, it's pretty clear that we're not dealing with a rational actor at all. And in fact, the one thing that they crave more than anything is the attention of the American people. And so I think, to the extent that there has been a more muted response, has been suggested here, is probably a pretty good thing. Every time they fire something off into the water next to the Korean Peninsula, it doesn't mean the American people need to rush out and note it. So, I can't fault them for their response to this.